I hope I've still got an audience. I could do something like saying, you might hear some really important steps of my campaign coming up. But no, that's a bit mean, isn't it? I have done that before. I said I did a silly video um, saying you're going to listen to some really serious stuff to get my next campaigning moves, but it was all a fake, just me having fun. Anyway, it's not a fun campaign, but I am a campaigner. I've become one, and I respect other campaigners recently, and I've sort of felt that God's drawn me to different people to have a look at. And one of the people that I felt God's drawn me to look at is the campaigner Mary Stopes, Stopes, who was British, Anglo-Scottish like me. She's an Anglo-Scottish campaigner for birth control in the early 20th century. And I got a biography of her. And basically, just to briefly, obviously, she's not Catholic, so she was hated by the Catholic Church and she hated them in return. But anyway, um, she managed to, she basically set up birth control clinics. She just did it with her husband. Um, and because she saw the need, she saw that there were, especially poor women in overcrowded cities, having huge numbers of kids and being, and these kids being, she had a kind of eugenic mentality, which was common at the time, but not very nice, of improving the racial stock. Did come out against Hitler later on, but at that time, before the Second World War, the intellectual elite of Britain and other countries, Germany and USA, I think, were quite pro eugenics. And so there was a double side to her. She did care about the suffering of mothers who seemed to have so many children because of what churches were teaching them, and not enjoying sex in the process, knowing nothing about sex. Um, so she broke through lots of taboos. You know, she tried to persuade the Anglican Church that she was a prophet in 1920, that they needed to listen to change their views on prophet from God, change their views on contraception. But they did 10 years later, and by the time she died in the 50s, late 58, I think it was, she had um, she had basically changed the landscape of Britain and made a big impact across the world as well. And she didn't set up abortion clinics, but obviously that has come in its wake. She was against abortion at the time. I don't know what a modern Mary Stopes would think. I think they probably would be pro-choice because they would see that the same issues still there, women not having freedom, a woman being told that they have to surrender their freedom to organizations and laws, and not seeing God, how God can work in that. And I think God can work in all that because of reincarnation. It's something that I've thought about a lot. More recently, since I felt forgiven by God, I sort of felt opened up, and God can show me new things. And I realized that the early church, I looked into the early church, and the early church, I think Jesus and Mary Magdalene would have both actually been believers in reincarnation, but the Catholic Church was airbrushed out of history or defined as orthodox or unorthodox or heretical. Any notions of reincarnation, even big thinkers like Origen, who had some notions of reincarnation, were never became saints because they weren't quite orthodox enough, despite being really heavyweight theologians. So there's all sorts of stuff out there in the very early church. There's a big welter, big load of maelstrom of different views on different theological topics, including reincarnation, universal salvation, karma. Um, different notions of church not being a structure, but church being the kingdom of God being in one's heart and just manifested by two or three people gathered in love. And all this is out there, but over time the church became the different strands of the church were kind of conquered really by the imperial strand in Rome that was very strict about structure, bishops, authority, and dealing with forcefully with error. Okay, so this masculine church. So I think it's a toxic masculine church, um, and eclipsing the feminine values of gentleness, receptivity, listening, mercy, love, um, and openness, and patience as well. I think patience, so that when people then that toxic masculinity of the church is in full spate, in full force, just wait, because you can't override forceful people. You can't override forceful people because that will be overriding their free will. Even God doesn't override free will. Sometimes that's very hard to see, that somebody's being oppressed by an institution or a law, by a bad actor, and God can't override that bad actor. Why not? Because that would be overriding their freedom. That would be another sin that would beget. It would produce other sins, and so that's the tragedy of lives, that they can be completely not wasted at all. Sorry, they can be completely lived in loss of freedom. And I believe there are some people in Opus Dei today, and some exes and some who have died, who've spent their whole life, absolutely their whole life, born, raised, um, in coercion, and died in coercion. I believe it. And that's really sad. And God will honor that. Okay, He will honor that. But so there are scriptures on reincarnation, so I do believe that God will honor it by giving them a more beautiful life in a further incarnation, or whatever they agree. I don't know how it works exactly. But if there is karma, then those of us who've done bad things in previous lives will will get it. We'll have to deal with it. And basically, what does that mean? In some place or another, we will have to feel what it's like. We agree to feel, put it that way. We agree to feel what it's like to be the person that we hurt. Okay, and feel fully, and be humble about that. And that's really hard. But God doesn't ask us too much, to do too much, and He can maybe give us many incarnations to get through stuff, and wait for us to be ready. There's a loving father, the father of prodigal son, waited. He didn't go saying, "Oh, I'll come back." Okay, there might be some bigger picture things where the design of the universe is such that God says, this is the end. We can't carry on with evil forever. So there can be some picture design features from God, but within that, generally, you've got this respect for freedom, and God weaving His way through, helping people to see how they, in different ways and experience in different ways, um, the hurt they might cause to others, and also to have some sacrificial souls as well, to invite them to take on the burdens, the legacies of structural sin. Jesus was one of those. He discharged the sin. I believe he discharged the sins of his Jewish forebears, and set them free from the Mosaic law, the law of Moses, to be free to live according to the Beatitudes. Blessed are the merciful, the just, the peaceful, etc. And so he's our great example in that. So we're going back to Mary Stopes. One of the reasons that I relate to her in lots of reasons. I read her what she did, and I just thought, God, this is just so me. One man or one woman kind of, steamroller juggernaut. Just absolutely determined to get this mission through. Okay, and very eccentric about it. And can't really work with her. Nobody could work with her. They just had to either agree with her or disagree with her. But she got there in the end. It maybe, I believe personally, I know that Catholics wouldn't agree with this, but I believe that God gave her that mission and said, "Look, that's what you've got to do in that incarnation." And it may have even been that He gave her that mission, saying, "Look, you're not going to be able to repent or forgive in that incarnation, because you're going to have to be a public figure. You're going to have to do so much. Okay, you're going to maybe have to do that. You maybe have to get through your repentance and forgiveness in a future incarnation. So just go for brokenness." And she did do bad things, okay, but in her personal life, I believe, there's a few things that she did wrong that I really, that hurt me, okay, personally. She had one son who she cosseted, and she was absolutely in love, obsessed with him, okay, and she couldn't have a second one, so she basically got in all these adoptees. So she contacted families to provide an adoptive sibling for mostly a brother, I think, for this boy. And she treated them badly. She treated her son more preferentially, and she sent a lot of them back, to the families, So there was this promise that they would have a better life, and they didn't. So she hurt a lot of kids, a lot of adopted kids, okay, by adopting them without caring for them, okay. So so I relate to that as an adoptee myself, who I was orphaned on the day of my birth and given up for 6 months before I was adopted. So that was something I wasn't happy about, just happy about seeing from her. What else did she do? That was probably the main thing. Um, she didn't really take part much in the First World War. People can criticize her for that, and I and I can see you know that maybe I don't know why that was, but she was quite visionary in some ways. She had this big letter writing campaign um, in the Second World War. She was trying to get in the Battle of Britain. She was trying to get the ministries and the government. She's trying to use her influence to get them to bomb Berlin in 1940. Okay, she said she had this quote saying that the Battle of Britain should be fought in the skies above Berlin. Okay, and her idea there was you just take out the head, you take out the head and eliminate the head, i.e. Hitler, um, and you don't have any more war. Okay, and one ministry wrote back agreeing with her. Another one ministry said that would be a terrible human rights catastrophe. Okay, and what time told was that the war went on for 5 more years, and in the end, the British did that with the Allies in Dresden, um, and big time. If you had that if they had the courage to have that precision strike in 1940 on Hitler's headquarters, they could have saved a lot of hassle, saved a lot of loss of life. So that's the lesson for me is that I try in my campaign to be precise, to go for precision strikes, okay, that will, if possible, try and solve problems with a minimal disruption, okay. I'm not going to be able to keep everybody happy all the time, um, especially people that should be doing things that they're not, or people that should be caring and they're not. I'm sorry about that. I really am, but there's a bigger picture out there of people not being looked after. And still to this day, I've got no assurances from St. Bede's College, Fidelis College, any Catholic safeguarding authority that my concerns about child grooming in those places and in confessions in general by Catholic priests, especially Opus Dei priests, I've got no assurance whatsoever from anybody remotely that that's going to be taken care of. None, really, really none. So how can I, in my conscience, who will have a son who wants to work in a school or a social setting, wants to go to an orphanage to help out, how can I how can I live with myself when I'm just getting zero back? Why, what, what is wrong with people? So I just need to know somebody's taking care of it and they'll come back to me. And I'm not going to give me the details, of course not. But I'm making a massive nuisance of myself, so it will be a good idea to let me know that in broad terms, somehow, that things are being taken care of, so I don't have to keep worrying about it. Don't have to keep pressing. And the fact that I do have to keep pressing indicates to me that the whole church is absolutely tied up in knots by Opus Dei in order for those people to be not to be not cared for and isolated, and for truth not to come out. And that's also the case for people, adults, vulnerable adults. I consider every celibate member of Opus Dei to be a vulnerable adult because they're in a coercive environment like I was. All the centres of Opus Dei I lived in were coercive environments. No two ways about it. And I really encourage people to read the judgment of Catherine Tissier, who was the French assistant numerary, domestic servant member who collapsed after 15 years living and working in centres in Paris, hospitality centres. She joined at 16 and she collapsed, but she collapsed quick enough. She got out quick enough to her family that the police, the French police, got involved, They prosecuted Opus Dei authorities and people for 100 labour offences, and she got £30,000 of compensation, I think. But that was only a small fraction of what she was due because of limitation, you know. So the limitation law is horrible on that. So, and it's one of the reasons I can't get very far with my case. And also, I just got no support from any ex-members or anybody, just nobody really. Um, so that's why I'm going down this road. I've tried the legal road, the personal injury road. That's more my line of things, but I haven't got anywhere with that. So now I'm trying a different road. Okay, and am I doing it for me? No, I'm not. I used to be doing it for me. At the beginning, I was doing it for me because I was still angry. But now I'm doing it for the people I care about, people I think about every day who are stuck in Opus Dei centres, trying to put a brave face on things, um, being told that they're serving God, and yet, you know, if only they'd had a few months of freedom to themselves, like every other ex-member, they'd probably start to realise that their autonomy had been taken away from them, and they need to live a new life. And that's the case with so many religious orders up to the 1950s and 60s. The church knows about these issues extremely well. Another book people can read if they're really interested in this is a book about spiritual abuses in the religious life by Dom Dysmas de Lassus. So I'll put that in the description. He's the head of the Carthusians, okay, and he's written a book on spiritual abuses last year, I think, in religious orders. Okay, he doesn't name any. Okay, but this is really worth knowing for anybody in safeguarding. I hope you've all read it by now, or at least you're open to reading it. And it speaks volumes to anyone who knows anything about Opus Dei, about spiritual abuse, what that involves. Okay. And what he says is that it's so subtle that you can have a week-long visitation from a diocesan investigators to a religious order's house and still not detect it. Okay. Probably if you'd been in a cult, you'd know, or if you are more emotionally in tune. But that's what we're looking at. That's what we're looking at. And imagine how can you possibly what resources does Catholic safeguarding authorities have to do that kind of level, where even in 1 week visiting a centre is not going to get to the bottom of spiritual abuse? Okay, so that's why really the depth of the issues of spiritual abuse are a level of subtlety and complexity way beyond the resources of even an institution like the Catholic Church in England. Most safeguarding officers are going to be thinking more about terms of very physical or sexual stuff, which is obviously bad. And it's bad actor stuff. It's not so much institutional. I'm sure you've got a lot of experience of institutional stuff too, but this is quite subtle. Unless you've spent years going into religious orders, and really know your stuff on that, you're going to not have the experience of that. And by the time you've got it, you'll realize you haven't got the authority and the remit to deal with it. And you go to your bishop and say, "What do you know about this?" And they'll say, "Well, it's difficult for me to say, really." And that's because they've known about it for decades, but they're not going to come clean about it, are they? So they'll just leave you in the shtuck, okay? There's a lot of spineless bishops around, spineless bishops who hide behind their whatever secrecy rules they've got to keep it in the family. But where does that leave the rest of us? Okay, where does that leave? This is what I'm bringing out. Okay, and if I can bring it out on this particular niche, well, surely that can be beneficial for other niches as well. All this can be good. And it means that people can get on with doing the work they're supposed to be doing when they know that some people are taking care of Opus Dei. That's what I need to know. Is anybody taking care of Opus Dei in reality? Because they're not. Now, if anybody can get through to Jack Valero, who's sorry, I keep calling him the misinformation officer. I don't know why I make that mistake. Anyway, an officer at Opus Dei headquarters in London, and say, "Look, let's work together on this. You must kind of like sober up a bit. Stop going around like a blue-ass fly trying to cover it all up. Articles about canonizations and discussions of the popes about perspectives on institutional life in Opus Dei and all this stuff. Like the machinations up in the Vatican on Opus Dei are just disgusting, really. And now all the priests will be like really top secret confidential about this, but anybody on the inside of Opus Dei knows exactly what's going on. Okay, I can be absolutely sure. And if I see some bad acting from the Vatican on apologizing for Opus Dei, I'm going to be really, really annoyed. Okay, So, so far I'm fairly mild mannered. Thank you for listening.